he's trying to avoid saying the books were cooked and just instead using this sort of like, well, people have questions and people are wondering. They're wondering because the president is alleging the books were cooked. It can make people wonder when you don't explain to them how it works and you try to suggest that it is insidious. I've been thinking a lot about President Trump firing the Commissioner of Labor Statistics. And I've been thinking about it a lot because it's a much bigger deal than just about the head of the Bureau being fired. It is consistent with some other things we've seen recently from the Trump administration. For example, this nonsense from Tulsi Gabbard about the intelligence being skewed, basically making allegations that everything else is politicized and I'm fixing it, right? When the reality is that they're fixing what ain't broke. And they are the ones not just politicizing it, but marginalizing truth and objectivity. And I care a lot about truth and objectivity, as those of you who listen to this show regularly know. And that is why I find this so troubling. And, I start to wonder why this time around, right? Is it just, meaning as opposed to when he was president the first time, is it just that he's got more confidence, there are less guardrails? In part, but in part, I think this is also about how compliant the right-wing media has become. And I'm going to talk about that in a moment with John Ziegler, who's a conservative media analyst. But first, let's go through this, right? So on Friday, President Trump decides he doesn't like the jobs numbers, right, which were not good. Rather than thinking about why, he decides to fire the person who oversees the numbers themselves. And I say oversees it, meaning you talk to anyone who has had a position like this, and they will tell you that they are getting the numbers from elsewhere. They aren't creating this. It's not like they're the chef and they're putting in all the ingredients, right? It's more like they're being delivered the final product and they are basically reviewing and overseeing it. You can't just manipulate the numbers, but that's exactly what Donald Trump is claiming with zero evidence, right? He said on True Social, I was informed that our country's job numbers are being produced by a Biden appointee, Dr. Erica McIntarfer, the Commissioner of Labor Statistics, who faked the job numbers before the election to try and boost Kamala's chances of victory. Now, I will explain in a moment why that is just factually inaccurate. This is the same Bureau of Labor Statistics that overstated jobs growth in March of 2024 by approximately 818,000, and then again right before the 2024 presidential election in August and September by 112,000. These were records. No one can be that wrong. We need accurate job numbers. I've directed my team to fire this Biden political appointee immediately. She will be replaced with someone much more competent and qualified. Important numbers like this must be fair and accurate. They can't be manipulated for political purposes. Again, zero evidence they've been manipulated, not any evidence. He went on to say, McIntarfer said there were only 73,000 jobs added, but more importantly, that a major mistake was made by them. 258,000 jobs downward in the prior 2 months. Similar things happened in the first part of the year, always to the negative. The economy is booming under Trump. Goes on to say, that despite a Fed that also plays games, this time with interest rates where they lowered them twice. And again, everyone is playing political games except for him, right? All of these entities that had long been viewed as the gold standard are now all in a partisan mission to screw him, even though they can't do it themselves. The Fed chair can't make that decision by himself. It's a board. The commissioner of labor statistics doesn't make this decision by herself. She gets the information from others. So after this happened, William Beach, who was Trump's first-term Bureau of Labor Statistics commissioner, called the firing baseless and damaging in a letter co-signed by the person who preceded him in that position. Not particularly surprising that they are taking that position because this makes no sense, right? Now, to be clear, the revisions in the Bureau of Labor Statistics under Biden went both ways. In May and June of 2024, so before and after Biden dropped out, the BLS lowered reported job gains by a combined 258,000 jobs. That is not a revision that helps the incumbent. So anyone claiming, why does it always just go in one way? Why is it always against Trump or for Biden? Isn't paying attention. It's just not true. But hey, why should that stop Charlie Hurt, who was sitting in on Fox and Friends this weekend, from making it up, right? And this is my point about the impact of the right-wing media. Here's Charlie Hurt this weekend, number 20.
When you look at the record of the Bureau of Labor Statistics and their record of having to revise these things, it's always in the same direction. And we saw it throughout the Biden years where they would come out with numbers just in time for an election. You would have an election that would help Democrats, and then afterwards, all the revisions always going in the same
like
direction.
During the Biden administration when they...
So made up, right? Just made up, not true at all. Just not true, as I just told you. I mean, this is the stuff that happens in B-rate third world countries. In Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe did it. In Venezuela, Maduro did it. The Wall Street Journal pointed out that in Turkey, Erdogan has done it more than once when they don't like the numbers. This is crazy stuff that is going to hurt the economy because people won't believe the numbers. Now, again, if Trump ends up appointing someone new who is a relatively straight shooter, there is going to be another time he's not going to be happy with the numbers. And to those who say, well, you know, these revisions, they all seem so shady. This is the way it works, meaning they get initial numbers in, and then the employers continue to send in data and reports. And once they're able to finalize it more, they make revisions. There is no way to do this without making revisions, unless you don't give any information until a month later or whatever, months later. The Bureau of Labor Statistics makes initial estimates, but this isn't in a vacuum, and that's my broader point. And now you have Trump administration officials trying to play with words, right? And you need to listen to it carefully, Because what the non-Trump people are trying to say is, well, it's time for a fresh face, and all these revisions, they're so significant, suggest that you need someone new in there. Okay, that's different than saying they're cooking the books, right? And they're trying as best they can to back up what Trump is saying. I mean, here's the White House National Economic Council director, Kevin Hassett, who was on CNBC today, and this is number 9.
Does the administration have any evidence that it was rigged, as the president said? And will you be presenting that to the American public?
Well, the evidence is that there have been a bunch of revisions that could appear to partisans. Oh, I mean, the revisions are hard evidence. There, for example, there was a 818,000 revision making the Joe Biden job record a lot worse that came out after he withdrew from the presidential campaign. There have been a bunch of patterns that could make people wonder. And I think the most important thing for people to know is that it's the president's highest priority that the data be trusted and that people get to the bottom of why these revisions are so unreliable.
Wait. That can make people wonder. Well, it can make people wonder when you don't explain to them how it works and you try to suggest that it is insidious. This clip is actually from yesterday, from Director Hassett. But, he's trying to avoid saying the books were cooked and just instead using this sort of like, people have questions and people are wondering. They're wondering because the president is alleging the books were cooked. That's why. And this is the sort of thing, the firing of the commissioner, that I don't think he could have pulled off in the first term. Because there weren't people like Charlie Hurt sitting in on Fox and Friends pretending as if, it always goes in the same direction. And this is connected to the nonsense from Tulsi Gabbard, right? Claiming that there was this grand conspiracy, again, that the intelligence was cooked, right? But when you really dig in, you realize she's comparing apples and oranges, right? There was no change, fundamental change in the position of the intelligence community. All they did is they took certain statements that talked about what Russia was trying to do and took it out of context, right? I mean, the big smoking gun from Tulsi Gabbard was a September 9th, 2016 memo from an official in Clapper's office arguing that a presidential briefing should note that Russia probably is not trying to influence the election by using cyber means, don't cut it off here, to manipulate election infrastructure. No one claimed that they were successful in any way when it came to election infrastructure. In fact, the administration came out and said there were small attempts, none of them were successful. And then they cite, they had this meeting where Clapper assistant directs them to produce an assessment that pulls together everything Moscow's been up to, right? And this is their smoking gun. That the Washington Post gets a leak that says the CIA has concluded in a secret assessment that Russia intervened in the 2016 election to help Donald Trump win the presidency rather than just to undermine confidence in the U.S. electoral system, according to officials briefed on the matter. Except that is exactly what they said. You want to talk about the leak? Okay. But that is entirely consistent with the conclusion that the IC drew. That this wasn't just an effort to undermine confidence. Now, later, after Trump won, there was more of that. But leading up to the election, the Russians were putting out ads about how bad Hillary Clinton was. Read the Mueller indictments. This is nonsense if you're paying attention. If you actually take the time and pay attention to what she's alleging, she's conflating the question of actually switching votes, successfully manipulating election infrastructure, with trying to influence minds on behalf of Donald Trump. There is no inconsistency. And yet, when you listen to Tulsi Gabbard talk about it, it's as if literally this is the crime of the century. This is how dishonest this is. This is number 21. This is Gabbard a couple of weeks ago on Fox News, number 21.
Maria, the implications of this are frankly nothing short of historic. Over 100 documents that we released on Friday really detail and provide evidence of how this treasonous conspiracy was directed by President Obama just weeks before he was due to leave office, after President Trump had already gotten elected. This is not a Democrat or Republican issue. This is an issue that is so serious it should concern every single American, because it has to do with the integrity of our democratic republic.
So if that's the case, why didn't it come out during the first Trump administration? I mean, the notion that, Trump didn't care about, he didn't even think about this stuff. And of course, he thought about it all the time in the first administration. So why is it suddenly coming out now? Well, I've been thinking about this quite a bit. I mean, about the level of the absurdity. And I got a note from conservative commentator John Ziegler, who's the host of the Death of Journalism podcast. And, I say he's a conservative, but he is very critical of Trump as well. So he certainly knows both worlds. And, his position is that it relates to the media. John Ziegler joins us now. John, thanks very much for coming on. Appreciate it. So lay out your theory for us here.
Well, Dan, I'm really glad that you're addressing this, because I think this is being largely missed as a media story. And your question is dead on. Your question is, so why is this coming out now? Obviously, we had a first Trump administration. By the way, we had a Biden administration after a Trump administration. So quite logically, the Gabbard story makes no sense, especially when James Comey was given a credit, I believe legitimately so, for helping elect Donald Trump to begin with. That's a piece of history that just keeps getting completely and totally forgotten. We just forget about what Comey did 10 days before the election, because that's a hell of a conspiracy.
And John, the other thing they ignore is that the FBI never leaked that there was a Russia investigation in the lead up to the election.
Correct. Yeah. No, 100%. I mean, this is the craziest conspiracy of all time, Dan. I mean, it makes absolutely no sense. So here's what's the difference. The difference is that the media environment has fundamentally changed from what existed in 2017. Now, you and I both know, because we've lived it, that things were already changing in 2017, but they had not yet collapsed. And in 2017, 2018, the mainstream news media still had legitimacy outside of the left wing in this country. They still had larger audiences than they have today. The New York Times and the Washington Post still had a lot more credibility than they do today, especially on the right. But there was still an element of the right-wing media during that time period that had a semblance of credibility and a willingness to stand up against absurdity. And both of those flanks, if you think about this as like a war, both of those flanks have collapsed in the last 7 or 8 years, where now the New York Times does, and I'm sure you've seen it, a really interesting piece about, this whole John Durham report situation where Durham himself effectively concluded that these emails that are now being touted all over right-wing social media as the smoking gun were actually faked by Russian disinformation, and that it's actually proof of the exact opposite scenario of what the right wing is claiming. In 2017, 2018, that type of report in the New York Times would have been taken seriously by a significant portion of the right wing and even in the right wing media. But today, Dan, it's the opposite. Not only is it not taken seriously, it is seen as a sign of the righteousness of their own cause. Because if the New York Times is against you, you must be telling the truth. You must be on the side of right. And then there's nobody left within the right-wing media echo chamber that is willing to stand up and say, guys, in this case, the New York Times is right. In this case, Tulsi Gabbard is playing fast and loose with the facts. In this case, this scenario, this conspiracy doesn't even make any sense, because they have now all realized there's nothing in it for them. There is nothing in it for standing up against the Trump myth-making. And Tulsi Gabbard understands her boss extremely well. She is giving him exactly what he wants, creating this myth that the base loves. The base is in love with this myth about the Russiagate investigation. And so effectively, this is like giving therapy to their customers in the right-wing media. And people that used to stand up, and I mean, look, I'm going to name some names here, but Tucker Carlson once upon a time might have stood up. Glenn Beck absolutely would have stood up. A friend of yours, Megyn Kelly, would have stood up. But they're all in the independent media now. There's nothing in it for them to stand up. So they will all go along with this and pretend to even believe it, because that's what the customers want. And it's all about servicing the customer, and it's not anything having to do with the truth.
The number's 866-967-6887, talking to John Ziegler. John, there's maybe no better example of that than you, meaning you still consider yourself a conservative. You could still, outside of the world of Trump, fit into what might be called the right-wing media in this country. And yet you have found yourself isolated and of a sort of pariah-like nature because you're way too conservative for liberals, and you are way too critical of Trump in a sort of call them as you see them way that they don't want to hear from you.
Well, Dan, not to be narcissistic, but I actually think that I am an interesting example here, because, and there's some data points that you may have even forgotten, even though you followed my career pretty carefully. I'm the guy who did a movie about Barack Obama's election called Media Malpractice that debuted on the Today Show in prime time. I'm a guy who was a writer and a consultant on Hillary, the movie that was the basis for the Citizens United Supreme Court case, which, by the way, is the most contrived Supreme Court case probably in modern history. But I'm a credentialed member of the right-wing conspiracy who has every reason to have suspicion about Obama and Hillary. But I also care about the truth. And I know that this conspiracy theory is crackpot and is not based in fact. It's not based in logic. And the truth ought to matter. But we no longer live in a world, Dan, on both the left and the right, where truth is the coin of the realm. The coin of the realm is popularity with your target demographic. That's all that matters. And I think we're at a breaking point, Dan, in all elements of media. I think this is getting worse than I ever anticipated, and it's happening faster than even I anticipated. And I'm somebody that's been way ahead of the curve on what fragmentation was going to do to our national discourse. I wrote a book about it in 2005 that no one bothered to read or buy. But it's even happening faster and more dramatically than I anticipated. And Trump understands this better than anybody. Trump is a genius at being able to manipulate the destruction of so-called mainstream news media for his own purposes. And I think you've articulated it very well in the first 15 minutes of this hour.
And as a result, there isn't a place in the new media world for people like you.
I am a square peg in a round hole world. And I even wonder, and I'm curious as to your thoughts on this, but I mean, your show on News Nation was, in my opinion, the best cable news show by far when it came to telling both sides of the story and getting to the heart of the matter and getting to the truth of the matter. Well, you're too busy to keep doing that. Can a show and can a network like News Nation exist in this environment? I have my doubts, and that to me is a damning indictment of where we are, because I think you did great work there. I think News Nation in general does great work, but that's not the environment we live in anymore. There's no incentive structure. The incentive structure, we have gone from broadcasting to narrowcasting to cult casting to micro cult casting. That's the business model now. Micro cult casting is way better for the bottom line finances than trying to actually tell the truth in a way that might appeal to people in the middle. It just doesn't exist anymore. The business model doesn't exist. And because the business model has been destroyed by fragmentation, I don't see a path back, Dan. That's the part that is so depressing to me. If you said, Zig, tell me how we get out of this, I have no idea. I really don't.
Well,
I used to think, Dan, I'm sorry, just to finish my thought. I used to think that when Trump was gone, there was a shot. I no longer believe that.
That's what I was going to say. I still think that when Trump is gone, there's going to be a shot. That the following to Trump is unique in a way that I don't think, J.D. Vance or whoever else could take over the mantle that could pull off the distortion of the truth that Trump leads. I don't think so.
Well, what I mean by this, I agree with you that Trump is a unique individual. But what I think has happened is that the rules for media engagement have been permanently changed. And when Trump leaves, conservatives aren't suddenly going to give credibility to the Washington Post and the New York Times again.
No.
Or that's never going to happen again,
Correct.
man. I mean, and similarly, Fox News is never going to be believed on the left ever again. So, and that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to this issue. So I think Trump has rewritten the rules in a way that it's going to be very difficult to ever reverse.